Okay, Ed, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to come and to share. And like Mark said, let's start off a little bit with what got us here. The really brief synopsis is that it was actually more than 5 years ago. There was a case that started in the Northern District of Illinois and then had a copycat case in Missouri. And that was a class action case. And it was brought by a group of sellers that alleged that they overpaid commissions because they were forced to pay for the buyer side of the commission fees, and that they didn't want to do that, but the way the system was designed, they really had no choice. The crux of the argument really centers around brokers sharing commission with one another. And it was the practice of listing agents going into people's living rooms, telling them that, hey, the way this process works is the buyer's gonna have an agent, and we're gonna pay that buyer's agent as the listing broker. And we have this thing called the multiple listing service, and we're required to put into the MLS a number that is the payment that's going to go to the buyer's agent. And if you don't put a certain number in, and by the way, in Missouri, that number was 3%. The evidence showed in the trial that over 4 years, in four separate and distinct MLSs across the state, more than 93% of all listings had an offer of compensation at 3%. Okay. So that was the evidence that was there. And it was the fear of steering that is the crux of the allegations of what is wrong. So specifically in this case, one plaintiff testified that he saw on the contract that he was signing, the listing agreement, that he could negotiate the fee. So he tried to negotiate the fee. And the agent told him, if you don't put 3% in this box, no one will show your property. So the seller kicked that guy out, said, I want to talk to somebody else. Went to a different company. Guess what? Asked the same question, negotiate the fee, got the same answer. That guy got kicked out. Third time is a charm, right? He was finally able to convince someone to do it for 2.5%. You know what actually happened in the case? This is bad evidence. The escrow company actually paid 3% to the buyer's agent because that's what they always pay. And they actually didn't find out that he had overpaid until the lawyers got involved and the lawsuit was filed. And it was through that process that they discovered he overpaid that 0.5% because the escrow officer never sent a check out for less than 3%. Right. So that's the context of the allegation of it's not that it's not negotiable inside of a contract. It's that in practice, everybody is trained to say when someone tries to negotiate that you're going to be harmed by not offering a certain number. And the argument was from the plaintiffs that then we overpaid because we never had a chance to negotiate this number down. And the jury, the case went to trial in October. The jury found for the plaintiffs in about an hour and a half. That is very fast. So it's not like it was close. It was overwhelmingly in the plaintiff's favor. And the judgment was for $1.8 billion, which under antitrust law gets tripled. So that's the context of what happened towards the end of last week. And so NAR did a very good job in trying to resolve and settle the case. NAR has been very clear about this. If they did not settle this case, they would have filed a Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Now, that would have protected NAR. NAR would have been good to go, right? Because they would have been protected in the bankruptcy. They would have had to pay something much later at a much lower rate, and they're out. But it would have left in the case everybody else, right? So this particular settlement, and Mark, if I could share my screen at this point, if that works for you.
Okay.
Let's see if all right. You got it?
Yes.
Great. So, get you guys off there. So the settlement, I'm going to talk a little bit about the settlement today and some of the good aspects of the settlement that really protect you guys as members is by paying this money, NAR got a release for the local associations, the state associations, every MLS that is under the NAR umbrella But more than that, they also got a release for every single realtor in the country, no matter what firm you're with. They also got a release for all but 94 brokerage firms. And that's huge, right? That's a big relief and allows people to move forward. Now, the release is only as to the seller claims, and just keep in mind, there are some claims from buyer class action lawsuits. That's a whole nother different animal. They're much weaker claims. And so NAR was comfortable settling the seller side out because they thought that's where the true risk was. And they'll continue to fight the buyer claims thinking that they'll be able to win those. And so that's kind of the setting for this settlement now that we have. So what we're going to talk about today, right? Those who don't know me, I'm Ed Zorn. Actually, I am not the chief executive officer. I'll have to have my staff do that. Art would not like this slide. I am the vice president and general counsel for CRMLS. Art Carter is our wonderful CEO. And I'm going to go over a little bit of the summary of what was settled. I'm going to talk a little bit about the rules and what rule changes the settlement requires. I'm going to talk a little bit about what CRMLS has already done. And then throughout this, go ahead and shoot questions as they come up to Mark. Mark, interrupt me as we flow through here, but we want to make sure we save a lot of time to answer the specific questions you guys have, okay? I want to start the conversation off with realizing that no matter how you feel about the lawsuit, what you think about the process, none of that matters now. It's over. Guys, this is the no way you go. So you don't need to moan and whine that it wasn't fair or whatever. It's not going to change anything, right? And I think this is the time to remember this great quote from Wayne Gretzky when he was asked, what makes you so great? And he says, I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been, okay? And as we go through these changes, I think you guys keeping that top of mind would really help, that there's great opportunity here. Buyer agencies not going anywhere. The industry's alive and well, and I would argue even better with these changes if you can embrace them instead of fight them, okay? So with that, let's go through a summary of what happened. So on March 15th, NAR announced this resolution, and very quickly on April 23rd, the court issued a preliminary approval, okay? And that's how these class actions work. There are stages of approval. So the first is the preliminary approval, which is granted in April 23rd. And now what that does is it opens up this period of time where other people can object to the settlement, including people who have maybe been damaged, those kind of things. And those kind of arguments and stuff will happen over the summer and into the fall. And then in November, there'll be a final hearing, okay? So we'll keep you updated as that process, runs itself through. So as of right now, at this very moment, the selling agent compensation field, right, the offer of compensation in the MLS is staying there until we're required to take it out under the terms of the settlement. The settlement requires that field to be out of the multiple listing service by August 16th. So we're looking at around August 13th, unless something changes through the court process with regard to our removal of the compensation field out of the MLS. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the rules, and we'll get into this a little bit more detail, right? So what happened in the settlement is it is requiring us as a multiple listing service to do 13 different things. There's literally 13 paragraphs that Art, myself, Devin, the team at CRMLS have to digest and then go in and modify our rule sets to make sure that the way you guys practice in the field is consistent with what these this element is. And the first one is that we are going to have to create a multiple listing service rule that says a buyer agent must enter into a written agreement before any buyer tours any home. And that agreement has to have at least these three terms in it. One, the specific fee that the buyer agent is going to charge or be paid. That fee must be ascertainable. I use the phrase no games, right? You can't do things like the fee is 1% unless the seller or listing broker offers more, than it's whatever they offer, right? Or I charge you nothing until we find the perfect house and then you're going to pay me something else, right? It's like just no games, right? And another key feature is that whatever the fee is that was negotiated, that's the fee you get. And just because some other party may have offered to pay more means that the consumers are going to keep that differential, not you as the agent or the broker. Okay. And keep in mind what the rationale for this. Remember, this case is about steering and the fear of steering, meaning that anything that incentivizes a buyer's agent is not a good thing, right? We should never be incentivizing a buyer's agent. Think about it. As a good buyer's agent, my one incentive is to find the very best property for my client, right? And their family at the best price possible. That's my incentive. Anything outside of that is not good for my buyer, right? We don't need an incentive for the buyer's agent to take buyers to properties that don't fit their parameters or aren't good for them, right? And so that's the concept here. And one of the things that was a challenge, especially for us in California, was almost nobody ever got buyer representation agreements signed, right? And what was the number one excuse why, even though everyone recommended it, no one did it? Why? Because no one down the street's doing it, right? My buyer can go to anyone else in the community, not sign a buyer rep agreement and go into any house. So the idea with this is actually for your protection to help you guys not be subject to that excuse anymore, right? Everybody has to get one of these signed. So the number one excuse stopping it from happening is now gone. And the idea here is that the buyer and the buyer's agent should be the ones who decide how much the buyer gets paid, not the seller and listing agent, right? So those of you who are good buyer agents and you bring high value to a deal, you should be very happy about this rule because you're not getting stuck with the crumbs that some listing agent is leaving you with in a hot seller's market. In a hot seller's market, great buyer agent should be charging a premium, right? Because let's be honest, you need to be a great buyer's agent in a hot seller's market, right? So you should be getting a premium. And so now you have that opportunity here. And so that's really what this rule was designed to do to help protect the consumers. And I think, again, for high value, good buyer agents, this is a really good thing. So the other thing we have to do is deal with the existing offers compensation field that's in the MLS, right? And so we now have to issue a rule that says that is not allowed, right? So we're going to be removing that field and all of the rules around you making some mandatory blanket unilateral offer of compensation. It's all gone, right? So there will be no offers of compensation inside the framework of the MLS rules, right? So we have to take another step further than that, though. And that is not only are we going to remove the field and remove the rule saying you have to make an offer, we're going to add a rule. And that rule is going to say you may not make any offer of compensation on the MLS to any buyer brokers. The reason we're doing that is that means you're not going to use agent comments. You're not going to bury it into a document that you attach as a supplement. You're not going to somehow put it in the property description, right? We are not going to allow anywhere in the MLS any kind of offer of compensation going from the listing broker or seller to the buyer's broker, okay? The second thing that was in the settlement that we're supposed to create a rule on is kind of pointless. It kind of tells me that some people who write the settlement agreement didn't know what they were doing, unfortunately, because this is already a rule. Right, we already have a rule in the multiple listing service that says the MLS will not collect what the listing broker made or the total compensation that was put in a listing agreement. But the reason this was added here was for a different reason. Notice what's missing on this list. Nothing stops the MLS in the settlement agreement from collecting what a seller paid towards the payment of a buyer's agent. We are going to continue to collect the actual payment that a seller made to a buyer's agent. And that's important because that's going to be information that you guys can use as you go on listing presentations, as you talk to buyers and make offers, which now the most logical way for a buyer's agent to get paid is to include your payment in the actual offer itself. So a sentence in the purchase agreement that says seller to pay buyer's broker X% of the purchase price at closing. One sentence is all it takes, right? So That is the most logical way for the process to work, and we'll be able to collect that information. Okay. Another rule that we have to implement is that we have to agree as a multiple listing service not to create, facilitate, or support any off MLS mechanism for listing brokers or sellers to make offers of compensation. Okay, so what that means is when we send a data feed out the door to portals or to people who run an IDX website, they're not able to do a side deal where people go to that website and separately input offers of compensation. If that happens, in 5 seconds, I will turn their data feed off and cut them off. So there's not going to be some competing outfit out there that has all of the offers of compensation on a single platform. Not going to happen. And again, for CRMLS to keep the release and the protections from us getting sued, we will be very aggressive in making sure this does not occur. Now, that being said, if on your very own website, the one that you run for your brokerage firm, and it is at the broker level, not at the franchise level, not at some other higher level, at the actual licensed broker level, right? We will permit at the beginning of this process you to put offers of compensation on your very own website, but only on your very own listings. That is allowed. Okay. I have no idea why you would do that. Right. I'll be honest with you. The concept of sharing commissions from a listing broker to a buyer's broker is a waste of your time. It is more complicated. It's rife with risks and challenges. Let me give you an example. You do know that the contract that got you paid was the multiple listing service rules. We had all kinds of rules about the fact that if you made the offer, it was unilateral. It applied to everybody, the same number. You couldn't change it. And if you didn't pay it, there was a mechanism of enforcement. None of that exists off MLS. In fact, there is no such thing as an offer of compensation off MLS. There's an advertisement, right? So when you go to a website and you see some broker advertising that they'll share a commission, it's just an advertisement. Realize what you have to do as the buyer's agent. You have to send a separate written document to that agent and separately negotiate that fee. I predict, Mark, in the short term, that many agents who see this commission sharing thing on a website or through a telephone call are going to do what they've always done, which is find out what the share amount is and then go take their buyer to the house, show it, they'll love it, they'll write an offer, they'll get to the closing table, and they're going to be hit with a rude awakening when they get to the closing and they go, well, where's the X percent that you said on the telephone you were going to pay me? And a listing agent's going to laugh at you going, well, you never sent a written commission agreement over, so you're getting exactly zero, right? Mark, I predict that in our Inland Empire area, there will be hundreds of transactions that will close where the buyer agent won't get paid because they're going to assume that the broker sharing off MLS will work just like it did on the MLS, and that's not the case. There's also some very significant discrimination and fair housing issues, right? What happens if I call Mark, one listing agent, and he gives me one number, and somebody else calls and gets a completely different number, and a third person gets a third different number, right? Because of the particular group or how much he likes them or doesn't like them. That's going to happen all over the place, right? So there's just the idea that sharing commissions off the multiple listing service will run in a smooth, orderly manner is not very realistic. And if for anyone in the room, put your hand up if you've done a commercial deal. What do we call the commercial guys, right? The wild, wild west, right? There's a reason we give that moniker to that process. Okay, because all kinds of strange and wacky things happen because there's no rules and no one's enforcing the rules. And that's how it will look. And here's the reality, guys. You don't need to do it. It's more complicated. It's a big hassle. And why? Right? It's just much easier for you as a listing agent to go in and negotiate the fee that you're charging for your listing services. And I'm going to share with you some other tools that is going to be helpful for you in communicating with your seller and working with your buyer. Okay. And that is, there's a 14th paragraph in the settlement agreement that applies to us MLSs. It says what we cannot do. And the first one is what I just talked about, right? We cannot at the multiple listing service make a rule that says you may not have offers of compensation to buyer brokers off MLS. And there's a really important reason for that. Even though it's a terrible idea to do it, it's your right to do something that's kind of stupid, right? You're allowed to have bad practices. I can't, from an antitrust standpoint, force you into a particular business practice off of the MLS, right? I can only create rules that deal with you dealing with the broker cooperative on the MLS. And so this concept here and this exception that was left in the settlement agreement was there to protect us as an MLS to make sure we don't make an overbroad rule. Another thing that we're not allowed to do is that we're allowed in the MLS to provide for the offer of concessions or the communication of concessions on the multiple listing service. Now, that's really important because concessions have always been things like, and by the way, I'm going to show you a slide later on how often this is. 40% of the closed listings in 2023 in CRMLS had concessions, having nothing to do with commission. Concessions where the seller pays for, put your hand up if you've ever had in the last 2 or 3 years, a seller pay for escrow and title fees for your buyer. Anyone get loan buy down points in 2023, right? When the rates were going nuts, right? What about a repair concession, right? We've all done concessions in transactions. So now what it's saying is a new thing that can go into that concession bucket now will be commissions, right? So if you have a conversation with your seller and your seller determines, hey, it's beneficial for me as a seller to provide an incentive to the buyer to help them pay for a buyer's agent, because that's going to make my transaction as a seller go much better if the buyer's represented. So I want to extend that opportunity and communicate that to a buyer. So we are going to put that in at CRMLS, right? And that takes us into the things that have already been approved. So we are going to roll out a new concessions in price field. It looks like we're going to roll this out towards the end of May. And yes, that means the concession field will be out before the commission field goes away. And it's fine because they're two different things, right? Again, concessions is not an offer of commission, right? The concession can be, and the communication of the concession can include everything together in one bucket, right? So let's say you talk to your seller and the seller says, I want to have X% in there to help a buyer's cover the buyer, his buyer's agent. And then you have a conversation with the seller and go, hey, look, we looked at 3 comps that are all $1 million, and all 3 of those comps had a renovated, updated kitchen. And while I know you really love the olive green 1972 oven that you have over there, a buyer's going to think that maybe needs to be updated. So why don't we put another percent into the concession for that someone could maybe use to update the kitchen? And maybe we put another 1% in to help them pay for fees, right? So you actually have X, which is the amount that may go to pay for a buyer's agent, plus an additional 2%, because there's other things with the home that the seller wants to communicate that they're willing to bring, to get buyers in, to make their home more like the comparables he's using that set that listing price, right? So concessions are going to be able to be used in a very multifaceted way. We're also going to deliver a checkbox where you don't have to commit to a number, where you simply say, okay, look, I don't want to commit to a number. I'm just telling you as a seller, I'll consider if the buyer wants to make a concession in their offer, I'll consider it. And what that tells me as a buyer's agent is that the listing agent did a good job. The listing agent had a conversation with the seller about the fact that they may need help. My buyer might need help financing the buyer fee that he agreed to pay me as the buyer's agent. And that conversation already happened. So they're ready to see something like that in the offer. So that's a good piece of communication. Or do nothing. You don't have to check anything. You don't have to put anything in. It's just an open thing, right? Here's what it looks like, right? It's already in our metadata. And again, we're going to be rolling this out at the end of May, probably somewhere right around May 28th. So be looking for some communications on that. You can see it's really easy, right? You'll type in a number or a percentage and you'll pick that under the concessions and price type. Or you'll pick a yes, no on whether you want that statement, right? Seller willing to consider buyer concessions if requested an offer. Yes, no. Super simple. It's going to take you guys maybe, 10, 15 seconds to implement this kind of element, right? And just to back up why this is an important field, even if none of this happened, Mark, I would argue we should be doing this anyway. Look at these numbers. We went back and looked over the last 5 years. Look at 2019, pre-COVID. Anyone think that we had more of a balanced market in 2019? Now, if you guys remember back to 2019, it was still very much a solid seller's market, not the craziest seller market we've ever seen from 2021, right? But it was still a solid seller's market. Look at that. Almost 70,000 closed listings had a concession in them. That's a lot, right? That's a lot of usage of this concession field that has absolutely nothing to do with commissions, right? It's just now what's going to happen is we're going to offer you the opportunity to market with this concession field. And if you want to add, if your seller wants to add a communication that they're willing to help the buyer agent, fee structure and to finance the buyer's payment of that fee, then that's a good way to see that, right? So we have worked with CAR. We made CAR very aware right at the beginning of this process of CRMLS's desire to roll the concession field out. I'll be honest with you, at CRMLS, we've been working on this since October on rolling a concession field out. So this is all even before the lawsuit went to trial, we were already talking about rolling concessions out. All right. And so these are some of the updates in the form. So as you're doing a listing presentation, this is in the form documents to help you have that conversation about what a concession is and get the permission from the seller to, authorize the optional seller concession language and commit to a particular amount, right? So it's right there in the agreement. So this is why I say when you start thinking about the opportunity to communicate information through the concession field and the opportunity for a buyer's agent to set their fee directly with the buyer and then ask for the payment of that fee from the seller in the purchase agreement, why do you need to share commissions amongst agents? There's like literally no point in it. And it's actually much more complicated because if you're going to try to keep the old way, you have to go out and negotiate a separate commission agreement. There's more paperwork. There's an additional layer of communication, right? Why? It's super simple, super straightforward to just go with kind of deal with just the own party that you represent, right? And so at CRMLS level, we have a devoted website that we constantly keep updated on this proposed settlement resources. You'll see some videos on there, frequently asked questions, knowledge base. And so there's a link there on that QR code, for that. And so with that, Mark, I've been blabbing on here for quite some time, maybe a half hour. So I'd love to see if there's any questions.
So let's end the view screen, and the answer is yes. So there was a question that asked, if you enter a listing into the MLS, can you have a link, a website link in that listing that takes the participant to the broker's website, which then shares a commission?
No.
No.
And no matter what you put behind the words, what if, any part of that has broker commission, my answer is going to be no.
Okay.
So you can keep trying and we can do this for a half hour, but anything that has the words sharing and MLS in the same sentence, my answer will be no.
Okay. There's another question.
Did you turn my sharing off so I can?
I did.
Good. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to move you to my screen.
So there was a question regarding new home builders. Are they also prohibited from marketing any kind of a percentage on a co-op for compensation?
In the MLS, they may not do it. Again, off MLS, nothing is, required there, right? I would argue there's no reason not to do the same thing with the builder, right? If I get a buyer rep agreement signed that includes looking at new homes, right? My buyer rep agreement is going to include those kind of properties also. So I just walk into the buyer and say, hey, I want the builder to pay the buyer's agent this amount of money.
Okay. So another question regarding banks and lenders. How are they viewing this term concessions and what kind of change are they looking at relative to this whole new world?
Great question. No change. You don't need to change anything. So under the current rules that exist right now, and what we're talking about here is what we call interested party contributions, right? We all know that. And interested party contributions are where you have those percentage caps, right? Every loan has one. Some are 6%, some are 8%, depends on how much you put down, right? VA, FHA, Fannie, Freddie, they all have these caps on how much can a seller, who's the interested party, contribute to the buyer's closing, right? So here's an interesting statement, Mark. On every one of those loan programs, you'll see a phrase like this: Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA. They all say the same thing, that to the extent that the seller's payment of any buyer fee that is, quote, traditional or customary in the area, in that marketplace, shall not be counted against the interested party contribution limits. Okay. So what that means is for 3 decades, the sellers have been paying the buyer agent fee. I can think of nothing more customary and traditional than that practice. And in fact, NAR has secured from Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA that no rule changes are in place. And they've all confirmed that if the buyer requests the seller to pay for the fee in the contract, and it's on the seller's side of the closing statement, that will not impact the loan or the IPC limits.
Gotcha. Another question has to do with how will this impact or not the issue of dual agency and open houses? Let's talk about the dual agency first, because there's a lot of agents that are talking about this. Even at CAR meetings last week, if I'm not mistaken, CAR actually has a committee looking at dual agency and whether it should or can survive going forward.
This will have no impact on dual agency. These rules, these guidelines have absolutely nothing to do with dual agency. It's nice that CR will look at dual agency. It doesn't matter. It's not going anywhere. The trial lawyers love dual agency. And so once we can become more powerful for them, then we can talk about what you guys want to do with dual agency. But until then, I don't see it going anywhere. So this has nothing to do with dual agency. I've heard people say, oh, well, now buyers will just go straight to the listing agents. No, they won't. Think about what that really means, right? We know with certainty that 80% of listing agents do not respond to a contact from a consumer within 24 hours. So I'm going to want to go look at 6 properties on Saturday afternoon as a buyer. So you're telling me I'm going to try to get a hold of 6 different listing agents? I'm going to take the half hour it takes to explain what I want, how I'm financed, how I'm qualified. I'm going to have that half hour conversation 6 different times. And I'm going to try to set 6 different times with 6 different people all on Saturday afternoon. I might try that once. And after 4 hours of banging my head against the wall, I'm thinking, why don't I just call a buyer's agent and do a 1.5 hour conversation and let them do all the work, right? So I don't see a big risk of people jumping over to going to the listing agent more than we had when we had the hottest sellers market ever, right? There was a massive motivation level for buyers to go straight to listing agents under that world. And some did, right? I'm not saying it'll never happen, but I'm saying this change is not going to drive more dual agency risk than we had in the hottest sellers market ever in 2021, 2022.
Right. As far as open houses go and the buyer broker agreement in place and
has nothing to do with open houses. So,
right.
So remember, here's what happens. In the rule that we are going to write at CRMLS about the requirement for a buyer's broker to have a written agreement before they show a property will have a sentence in it that says nothing in this section shall impose any obligations or requirements on the listing broker, right? And it makes sense, right? A listing broker has permission in the listing agreement to show the property to anybody they want. Anybody who is unrepresented can walk through the door because they have specific permission from the owner of the property to open the front door. But me as a buyer's agent, I don't have that relationship with your seller. I don't have permission from the seller to open the door and take any Tom, Dick, and Harry that I met on the street through the house, right? The MLS rules are saying I'm only getting permission as the buyer broker to take my clients through the house, not anybody. They got to be my client, right? That's what our rules say. So that's different. So in an open house, the listing agent is there saying, hey, I'm opening the home with my seller's permission, and a bunch of unrepresented people are coming through, or someone may be represented by another agent who's coming through, and that's all fine. That doesn't impose any obligations on the listing agent. You don't need to sign anything to hold an open house.
Excuse me, there were a couple questions regarding VA loans and the prohibition against buyers paying commission for their agent. Is the simple suggestion just to have the seller pay it as part of the offer?
That's the simple, and my response to those questions too, whether it's a VA or not, and someone says, well, what happens if the seller won't pay? My question to you is, what do you do now? Realize that's not a settlement question. It has nothing to do with the settlement. We have 100 listings right now in CRMLS with zero offer of compensation. We have been telling people for years now that you don't have to offer compensation, right? Isn't that what we've been saying? So what do you do now? Right? That's not a settlement issue. That's today. Today, there may not be an offer of compensation, but the answer is the same, right? Which is, as a buyer's agent, I really don't care that much what happened between the listing agent and the seller. I don't care. I'm good at what I do as a buyer's agent. I'm going to describe how great it is to work with me. I'm going to set the fee that I'm going to charge. I'm going to explain to my buyer that we are going to include this fee in every offer we make from this point forward, irrespective of what's been communicated to me by a seller or a listing agent. I don't care. I'm putting it in, and we're going to make it part of the negotiation. That's what's going to happen. And so that's the answer that I would have, even if today I was representing a veteran and there was zero offer of compensation. I'm still making the offer, and I'm putting the fee in there. And if I have to adjust the purchase price accordingly, then I'll adjust the purchase price. If I have to show comps to demonstrate that the comps that were used to set this price had seller paying other types of concessions and fees in it, then I'm going to argue that you can't use a comparable of $1 million or three comparables of three homes that sold for $1 million, all of which the seller paid a bunch of fees on behalf of the buyer, and then argue as a seller, I want $1 million and pay zero fees. Oh no, that's not how that's going to work, right? We're going to, if you want to pay zero fees, cool, no problem. But you don't get the money that the same guy got that paid a bunch of fees. You're going to get the price minus the fees. That's how that's going to work. And it's upon us as agents in the field on both the listing side and the buyer side to explain that process to our clients, manage those expectations at the very beginning part of the relationship.
One of the questions has to do with, as some of these rules are coming into play and some of the contracts and new forms are being updated, what happens to contracts and forms that are in today's standard? What's the transition? How is that going to be handled?
Okay.
I mean, there's going to be some drop dead dates on some things and some guidelines, but any suggestions on that?
Yeah, so a couple things. CAR is already going to be, I think, publishing before the June release, the advisory on commissions, right? So that's a form you can use as you go do presentations now. This is, Mark, is exactly why we're rolling the concession field out in May. And guys, right now, if you want to do this side of the practice, not offer any compensation, you can put a 0 in the comp field right now today in CRMLS, and an agent comments, right? You can say seller willing to consider concessions if made in an offer. So you can do this in the system today if that's how you want to sign up your new listing agreement. So if that period goes through the August 13th date, you don't have to change a contract. Right. So those are some techniques. I know CAR in their forms is creating a specific form for those properties that have not gone pending before the cutoff date of August 13th for us. So what we're going to do at CRMLS, just to further explain the process, is any property that is an active or coming soon status, hold or withdrawn on August 13th, we will be removing any offer of compensation as we make the field go dark. We are going to keep the historical record of what happened in the past. And if you have a pending or an active under contract deal, the commission will stay, right? Because that was done before August 13th, right? So that's already contractually completed. Okay. So really around right now, our target mark is August 13th. It might move a day or two depending what happens tech wise, but that week of August there, that second week of August is what you guys should be thinking about. But you can alter your methods today if you want.
Good, good. So one of the questions says, if the seller does not agree to the same amount of the commission and the buyer broker agreement, how does that affect the lending part?
Again, it doesn't affect it at all, right? I would assume what's going to happen is whatever the seller pays to the buyer's agent, that's what the seller pays the buyer's agent. It shows up on the closing statement, and that's that. Again, this can happen today. What happens, because I'm a great agent, I do X, and I take my client to a property where the offer of compensation is X minus 1%. Right? So there's a 1% differential between what my agreement says with my buyer, right? I can either ask the seller to increase the purchase price by 1%, so we wrap it into the loan so the lender finances it, or the buyer pays me out of pocket, or honestly, we go to a different house, right? That happens, right? What happens if you need help getting in as a buyer and you need help with title and insurance, or excuse me, title and escrow fees be paid by the seller because you need help in getting into a deal, and the seller says no? What do? You go to a different house, right? This is how we do it now.
Buyer's agent is prepared to reduce their commission based on what was initially in the buyer broker agreement. They're not allowed to do that?
No, you can always reduce, right?
Okay.
It's, you just can't go up. So remember, this is
Right.
consumer protection issues,
Right.
right? The idea, and think about it, this makes sense, right? Because I hope no one was charging more, right? Because I don't know, I'm a lawyer. You guys probably have lawyers and CPAs. Who here wants to, after tax time, go to your CPA after you agree to pay him X dollars to prepare your taxes? You show up, he prepared your taxes just like the deal is you cut with him, and he hands you a bill with X plus 30%. Do you guys clap your hands and go, oh, sure, no problem? Or do you tell him, hey, you're a jerk. You told me you would do it for X. I'm not paying you a penny over X. Who in their right mind is going to negotiate something with their own client, do those exact services, nothing more, and then get paid more? How's that request for referral going to go?
Right. Right. We're coming up on 10 o'clock. We try to end this meeting sometime around now. Are there any last questions for Ed? Ed, you've covered a lot of material. I see a lot of faces, mostly smiles, but a few wide eyes. Excuse me. Okay, any other last questions? I do not see any here for you, Ed. Thank you so much. Great job, great overview. There was a question regarding the slides. Are those available on CRMLS's website, or can you make them available to us to push out?
Yeah, you know what? I will talk to Nicole in our marketing department, and we'll see if we can just drop them up on that, because that way we'd like to do is keep the most current updated of slides, because as things happen, they change, right? So
Right.
we're a little, we put certain dates in things, and then all of a sudden 2 weeks later something changes. So what we'll do is we'll put it up on the website, so that way we'll make sure it's always the most current version with any kind of updates on it.
Well, as the new CEO of CRMLS, it's important for you to do that. All right, Ed, thank you so much. You
Yep.
covered a lot of great material. We'll probably have more follow-up over the coming weeks and months
Sure.
on this issue, but enjoy Knoxville. You said there's a huge thunderstorm hitting you right now.
Yeah, that's not unusual in springtime for us out here.
Yeah,
So
well, it's sunny and beautiful out here, so take that.
it'll be like that in about 2 hours here. So we're good.
All right. Okay, well, we're going to end this here. Thank you so much, Ed,
Right.
and appreciate everything.
Right. Thanks for the opportunity, you guys. Get out there and guys, remember, this is not hard, right? Just embrace the change. Don't fight it, and you will find it's not that big of a deal.
Great.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right.